Namaste everyone, I am your co-host Shravani ma'am. Welcome to your favorite learning channel. The topic for today's video is eukaryotic cell, the cell wall and plasma membrane present in them. So we already know that eukaryotic cells are those cells that have a true nucleus that is surrounded by a nuclear membrane, and eukaryotic cells also have all the cellular organelles present in them unlike the prokaryotic cells. Okay. So today first we will understand the cell wall that is present in the eukaryotic cell. So this cell wall is a structure that is present in eukaryotic cells like plant cells. In fungi, the cell wall is present, whereas animal cells lack the cell wall. So we can say that the cell wall is a rigid outer covering. So what is a cell wall? It is a rigid outer covering. Okay. So this is a rigid outer covering which is present in plant cells and absent in animals. So even though animals are eukaryotes, they do not have cell wall, whereas other eukaryotic cells like plant cells, even in fungi, we can find the cell wall. Okay. So this rigid outer covering is usually present outside the plasma membrane. Okay. So the cell wall is a dead and it is also freely permeable. The plant cell wall is composed of, now let's see the composition of plant cell wall. It is composed of what? It is composed of mainly composed of cellulose. Okay, so we can say that plant cell wall is cellulosic because the main component is cellulose. Now this cellulose, it is a complex substance that provides structural strength to the plants. So there is a pectin-rich cementing substance between the walls of adjacent cells, which is called the middle lamella. So what is middle lamella? Middle lamella. It is pectin-rich cementing substance. It is pectin-rich cementing substance. Okay, that is present between the walls of adjacent cells. Where is it present? It is present between the walls. Present between the walls of the adjacent cells. This is known as middle lamella. So the cell wall formed immediately after the cell division is called primary cell wall. So this primary cell wall, when is it formed? It is formed immediately after cell division. So immediately after the cell division, the cell wall that forms, that is called the primary cell wall. Okay. So this primary cell wall is composed of what? It is composed of hemicellulose and loose network of it contains a loose network of cellulose cellulose microfibrils. Okay, this is what the primary cell wall is made up of. Okay, then in some type of cells there is an additional layer which is present, okay, to the inner surface of the primary cell wall. So the additional layer to the inner surface of primary cell wall is called the secondary cell wall. This layer is called the secondary cell wall, which forms in some types of cell. Okay, now what is the secondary cell wall made up of? So it is composed of what? The secondary cell wall is made up of cellulose, hemicellulose and lignin. Okay, so in many plant cells what happens, there are several minute or narrow pores present. These pores are known as pits, and through these pores fine strands of cytoplasm known as plasmodesmata can pass. So plasmodesmata are basically what? They are the cytoplasmic bridges. So plasmodesmata are the cytoplasmic bridges. Okay, these cytoplasmic bridges are known as plasmodesmata. Through the cell wall, they connect the cytoplasm of adjacent plant cells and allow the exchange of substances between the living cell contents. Okay, so this was about the cell wall present in some of the eukaryotic cells. Now let's see what are the functions of the cell wall. So let's talk about the functions of cell wall. So the main functions of cell wall that we will enlist here are: the cell wall acts as a protective layer. So it acts as what? As a protective layer in plant cells. Okay. Then it also provides a mechanical support. It provides mechanical support. So it provides mechanical support to the cells, and the cell wall also determines what? It determines the shape of the cells. So these are the main functions of cell wall. Okay. Now after cell wall, let's move to the cell membrane. Okay. So let's now talk about the cell membrane. So this cell membrane is present in all the cells, both in prokaryotes as well as in eukaryotes. So all the cells, that is both the prokaryotes and eukaryotes, are bounded by a thin delicate membrane called cell membrane or the plasma membrane. So this plasma membrane is also known as cell membrane. It is also known as what? It is also known as plasma membrane. Okay, or it is also known as plasma lemma. plasma lemma or the cell membrane. So the plasma membrane, the cell membrane and plasma lemma are one and the same. So the plasma membrane is so thin that it cannot be observed under light microscope. And this plasma membrane cannot be removed without killing the cells, as it plays a vital role in the maintenance of cell in a stable state. So it physically separates the cytoplasm from the surrounding cellular environment. So the cell membrane, it physically separates. So it physically separates what? It physically separates cytoplasm from the surrounding cellular environment. Okay, so this is what the plasma membrane or the cell membrane does. So the cell membrane is a fluid mosaic assembler of molecule of lipids, proteins and carbohydrates. Okay, so it is a fluid mosaic assembler of what? It contains lipids. It also contains proteins and carbohydrates. Okay, so it is a ultra thin living and dynamic and selective transport barrier. So in plants, the plasma membrane is found between. In plants, plasma membrane is found. Where is plasma membrane found? It is found in between cell wall, in between the cell wall and the cytoplasm. This is in case of plants. Now let's see in case of animals what happens. So in case of animals, the plasma membrane is found. The plasma membrane forms. This plasma membrane forms the cell surface. Okay, because as we already discussed that animals do not have cell wall. So chemically, plasma membrane consists of plasma membrane has what? It has 75% of phospholipids. Then 50% of proteins and there is cholesterol and there are carbohydrates as well. Okay, so there are 4 major classes of lipids. Now these lipids that are present, they are of 4 major classes. And what are these 4 major classes of lipids present in the plasma membrane? They are glycolipids, then sterols, phospholipids, and the sphingolipids. Okay, so this cholesterol is abundantly present in the plasma membrane of mammalian cells. Okay, So this is abundantly present. So it is abundant where? It is abundant in mammalian plasma membrane. Whereas this cholesterol is absent. Absent in where? In prokaryotes. In prokaryotes. Alright. Now, according to the position of proteins, this was about lipids. So now, according to the position of protein, so based on position of proteins, these proteins present in plasma membrane can be classified into two types. And what are these two types? One is the integral or the intrinsic proteins, and the other one is called the peripheral or extrinsic proteins. Okay, so these are two types of proteins based on the position of the proteins. Now both of these proteins may be either ectoproteins, which means that lie external to plasma membrane, or they can be endoproteins, which means they lie internal to plasma membrane. Now this classification of proteins was based on their position. Now based on the functions, functions of what? Based on the functions of proteins, they can be classified into three types. And what are these types? One is the structural proteins, the second one is enzymatic proteins, and third one is transport proteins. Okay, so these are the three types of proteins based on the functions of the proteins. Alright, then now that we know what is plasma membrane, so let's see what the transport proteins do. So these transport proteins actually, they allow the specific substances to cross the plasma membrane. So the carbohydrates, when attached to the ectoproteins, form glycoproteins, and when they are attached to the polar ends of the phospholipids, they form glycolipids. Okay. So now let's understand what is fluid mosaic model of plasma membrane. Okay. So let's discuss about the fluid mosaic model of plasma membrane. So let's see what is it. So this fluid mosaic model was proposed by Singer and Nicholson in the year 1972. So according to this model, the biological membranes are sheet-like. So according to this model, what does this model say? This model says that the biological membranes membranes are actually sheet-like. So these are sheet-like structures that consist of mainly these sheet-like structures. They consist of mainly what? Proteins and lipids. Okay. So the lipids are arranged in two layers, approximately 60 to 80 Armstrongs in thickness, and the proteins are scattered throughout the bilayer and they perform most of the membrane functions. So the membranes are actually two-dimensional fluids having both lipids and proteins that are constantly in motion. Okay, so we can say that the intrinsic proteins, the intrinsic proteins. So these intrinsic proteins, they completely cover the lipid bilayer. They completely cover what? They completely cover the lipid bilayer. So we know that this fluid mosaic model says that it is a bilayered structure. So in this bilayered structure, the intrinsic proteins completely cover the lipid bilayer, while the extrinsic proteins extrinsic proteins, what do? These extrinsic proteins, they lie either on the outer surface or on the inner surface. They lie either on the outer surface or on the inner surface of the lipid membrane. Okay, so this model has been described as this fluid mosaic model. This model is described as what? It is described as a number of icebergs floating in the sea of lipids. A number of icebergs floating in the sea of lipids. So this is how this model has been described. Okay, so the proteins that are present, they act as, so proteins present in the plasma membrane, proteins present, how do they act? They act as one, they act as enzymes. Okay, they act as enzymes to catalyze the chemical reactions. Okay, so as to catalyze the chemical reactions that take place within the membrane. Then these proteins also act as the transport proteins. Okay, and these transport proteins help in the movement of water soluble ions. Okay, then they also act as pumps, and by acting as pumps they help in the active transport of substances Okay, and they also act as the receptor proteins, and such receptor proteins help in the process of endocytosis. Endocytosis. So by these we can say that the presence of lipids and proteins provide the much needed flexibility to the plasma membrane for performing endocytosis, okay, in the cell. So this is about the fluid mosaic model given by Singer and Nicholson. Okay. Now let's see what are the functions performed by the plasma membrane. So now we would be discussing about the functions of plasma membrane. So this plasma membrane, it helps to communicate with other cells. It helps to communicate with other cells. Then it also gives assistance in maintaining the shape of the cell. So it gives assistance. Assistance in what? Assistance in maintaining the shape of the cell. Then apart from this, the plasma membrane permits the entry and exit. It permits the entry and exit of some materials in and out of the cell. Of some materials in and out of the cell. Okay. Then it also prevents the movement of some other materials. It also prevents what? It prevents the movement of some other materials. Okay. So, and because of this, the cell membrane is known as a selectively permeable membrane, because it only allows the movement of some materials while it prevents the movement of some other materials. Because of this property of plasma membrane, it is also known as a selectively permeable membrane. Then it also helps to hold the cytoplasmic content. Okay. Then it allows organelles to have the motility. Okay. So these are the few major functions of plasma membrane. So now let's quickly revise everything that we have covered today. So today we talked about the eukaryotic cells, and we discussed about the cell wall that is present in them, and we also talked about the plasma membrane. Okay. So first we saw plant cell and animal cell. So in plant cell there is cell wall, whereas animal cells have only plasma membrane and they do not have the outermost covering, that is the cell wall. So animal cells, though they are eukaryotes, they lack the cell wall, whereas other eukaryotic cells like plant cells, fungi, they have cell wall present in them. So what is a cell wall? So cell wall is actually a rigid outer covering, and this cell wall is absent in animals and can be present in plants, fungi and other eukaryotic cells. Okay, so the plant cell wall is mainly composed of cellulose, and hence we also say that plant cell wall is cellulosic because the main component is cellulose. So the cell wall is actually dead and is freely permeable. Now what is middle lamella? It is actually a pectin-rich cementing substance that is present in between the walls of the adjacent cells. Then we also talked about the primary cell wall. So this primary cell wall actually forms immediately after the cell division, and the primary cell wall is composed of hemicellulose and a loose network of cellulose microfibrils. Now in some cells there is an additional layer that forms to the inner surface of the primary cell wall, and this layer is known as secondary cell wall, which is composed of cellulose, hemicellulose and lignin. Now what are plasmodesmata? We also discussed about the plasmodesmata. So what happens in many plant cells, there are narrow pores which are known as pits, and through these pits fine strands of cytoplasm known as plasmodesmata can pass. So plasmodesmata are commonly known as cytoplasmic bridges, and through these cytoplasmic bridges the cell wall connecting the cytoplasm of adjacent plant cells, okay, they actually help in connecting the adjacent plant cells and allow the exchange of substances between the living cell contents. Okay, then we also discussed about the functions of the cell wall. So the cell wall actually acts as a protective layer in plant cells. Then it also provides mechanical support to the cells, and it determines the shape of the cells. Then we discussed about the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is also known as, this is the cell membrane. So cell membrane is also known as plasma membrane or the plasma lemma. So all cells, whether they are prokaryotic cells or eukaryotic cells, they all are bound by this thin delicate membrane, that is the cell membrane. Okay, so the plasma membrane is so thin that they cannot be observed under the light microscope. So it cannot be removed, that is the plasma membrane cannot be removed without killing the cells, because it plays a vital role in maintenance of the cell, and in this maintenance that is done by the plasma membrane, it is done in a stable state. So we cannot remove the plasma membrane without killing the cells. So what does the cell membrane do? It actually physically separates the cytoplasm from the surrounding cellular environment, that we can notice in these diagrams. That is, this is the plasma membrane. It actually physically separates the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is present inside the cell, so it is physically separating cytoplasm from the surrounding cellular environment in all the cells. Okay, so then we discussed that in case of plants, this cell membrane or plasma membrane is present in between the cell wall and cytoplasm, whereas in case of animals, the plasma membrane forms the cell surface itself, because there is no cell wall present in animals. So chemically the plasma membrane consists of 75% of phospholipids, 50% of proteins. It also contains cholesterol and carbohydrates. So the lipids that are found in plasma membrane are majorly of 4 classes, that is the glycolipids, sterols, phospholipids and sphingolipids. Now this cholesterol, it is abundantly present in mammalian plasma membrane, whereas the cholesterol is absent in case of prokaryotes. Now we also discussed about the two types of proteins based on the position of the proteins. So based on that position, the two types of proteins are the integral or intrinsic proteins, and the other one is peripheral or extrinsic proteins. Now both of these proteins may be either ectoproteins, that is they lie external to the plasma membrane, or they can be endoproteins that lie internal to the plasma membrane. So this classification was based on the position of proteins. Now based on the functions of proteins, they are of three types. They are the structural proteins, the enzymatic proteins, and the transport proteins. Then we discussed about the fluid mosaic model of plasma membrane. So this fluid mosaic model was proposed by Singer-Nicholson in the year 1972. So what does this model actually say? So according to this fluid mosaic model, biological membranes, so what it says is the biological membranes are actually sheet-like structures that consist of proteins and lipids. Okay, so the lipids are actually arranged in two layers, approximately 60 to 100 angstrom in thickness, and the proteins are scattered throughout this bilayer, and they perform most of the membrane functions. Okay, so these intrinsic proteins, what do? They completely cover the lipid bilayer. And what does extrinsic proteins do? The extrinsic proteins, they lie either on the outer surface or on the inner surface of the lipid membrane. Okay, and this model is described as a number of icebergs floating in the sea of lipids. So the proteins that are present in the plasma membrane, they act as enzymes that catalyze the chemical reactions. They also act as transport proteins that help in the movement of water soluble ions. They also act as pumps that help in active transport, and they also act as the receptor proteins that help in endocytosis. Okay, then we discuss the functions of the plasma membrane. So what does plasma membrane do? It helps in communication. So it helps it helps to communicate with other cells. Then it also gives assistance in maintaining the shape of the cell. Then the plasma membrane also permits the entry and exit of materials in and out of the cell, and it also prevents the movement of some of the other materials, and because of this property of plasma membrane, it is commonly known as a selectively permeable membrane. Then the plasma membrane also helps to hold the cytoplasmic content, and it allows the organelles to have the motility. So these are some of the main or important functions of plasma membrane. So I hope you all would have got some great insights by watching today's video. Please do not forget to like and share the video. Till then, thank you for watching.